Liebe Freunde des Magazins, ich habe heute einen ganz speziellen Gast bei mir, den Entwicklungsökonomen und Historiker Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you for your precious time.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Make America Great Again, das ist das Schlagwort, das in aller Munde ist. Warum haben die Amerikaner das Gefühl, dass sie nicht mehr groß und großartig waren? Denn immerhin hat man noch die politische und die emotionale Macht, Stellvertreterkrieg in der Ukraine zu führen.
America's big, powerful, and whining all the time, complaining all the time, feeling aggrieved all the time. Partly it comes from arrogance, strangely enough. The American mindset is we should have everything. When there is some limit, well, that's a grievance. And Trump is a master at grievances. So for him, everything is a complaint. Look what China does. Look what these migrants do. This is the politics of grievance, and it works. Americans are annoyed by the low quality of government. I don't think Trump has too many answers for them on many, many fronts. Maybe he'll do some good in certain areas, though. I must say, every president, at least since Bill Clinton, which was the 1990s, then George Bush Jr., then Obama, then Trump, then Biden, I've kept saying, oh my God, so much incompetence. And the American people feel that. And so Trump is saying, I will restore America, but we'll see. Some of the things he says make sense. Some make absolutely no sense at all. And so we're in for a ride.
Würden Sie sagen, dass die Präsidenten vorher, Sie haben angefangen mit George W. Bush oder mit George Bush, mit dem Vater, die waren inkompetent. Was ist mit den Präsidenten vorher? Carter, Nixon, waren das kompetentere?
I say since Bill Clinton came to office, it's been at best mediocrity, but in general incompetence. So I would put all of the presidents, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, Trump 1, Biden, as below the standard of adequate, and some cases terrible. Bush Jr. invading Iraq, Obama invading or trying to overthrow the Syrian government, attacking Libya, participating in a coup in Ukraine. Terrible. Biden, I was shocked because I voted for him in 2020, and he was just miserable. Maybe, by the way, so old that he wasn't really there. And they may have just been hiding his incapacity. We don't really know. But he was terrible. This war in Ukraine could easily have been avoided with normal diplomacy between the US and Russia, but Biden wouldn't engage in it. And even when there was a chance of the war stopping in March 2022, in the negotiations that Turkey was mediating, Biden stepped in to stop that too, so that the war continued. So I'm pretty disappointed in our political system. Of course, there are many reasons for it, but one is that money took over American politics decades ago, and that means that we have special interests buying the politicians basically, and you don't get good results out of that.
Wir waren jetzt schon bei Russland. Ich würde gerne noch innenpolitisch bleiben, Jeffrey. Man hört jetzt ganz viel vom neuen Gilded Age, das ausgerufen werden soll. Trump zitiert immer William McKinley und seine Zollpolitik. Das klassische Gilded Age, das hatte Figuren wie Carnegie und Stanford, Menschen, die aus Stahl was geschaffen haben, Eisenbahn, Elektrifizierung. Die haben einen schlechten Ruf heute, Räuberbarone nennt man sie, aber gleichzeitig haben sie Amerika groß gemacht. Das neue Gilded Age unter Trump, der hat Leute wie Zuckerberg und Musk. Machen die nicht in Bullshit-Industrie?
Actually, Musk builds a lot of interesting things. Musk builds Teslas. Musk builds starships. Musk builds humanoid robots. He's actually a very, very interesting entrepreneur. So I would put him in the class of great entrepreneurs, actually. Does that make him appropriate as a prime minister, which in fact he kind of is right now? No, I don't think so. The fact that at the inaugural you had actually so many billionaires around, and they had funded this takeover of power. And we know that the top richest 10 Americans now have more than $2 trillion of wealth, and they're very politically active right now. Yes, this is the Gilded Age on steroids, I would say. This is much more even than it was in the age of the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. Now, what will come out of this, what is happening in the economy over the last 30 years is more and more inequality, more and more concentration of wealth. And in the American system, that wealth is turning into a concentration of political power. I don't think that's going to slow down in the next few years. I don't hear any word about the common people in any of the discourse. And when you think about McKinley, well, that was the age not only of the Gilded Age wealth, but that was also the age of imperialism, which of rank, gross imperialism, which Trump obviously admires. In 1898, during the McKinley administration, they just decided it was time to pick up some new American colonies. So they concocted a phony war. It was a real war, but on phony pretenses with Spain. And there's the Philippines, there's Cuba, there's Costa Rica, Puerto Rico. So they started building their empire. Trump loves this idea. Greenland, Canada, Panama. Well, this is his milieu right now, his métier. So this is very strange.
Sie sprachen ja von Elon Musk und dass er wirklich viel macht, Teslas und auch in KI und so weiter. Er forscht ja wie andere im Silicon Valley auch am ewigen Leben. Ist das eine Branche, von der Sie sagen würden, das ist richtiges Business oder ist das Träumerei?
You know, maybe Elon Musk's big passion is getting to Mars. And he even says, we can't be bound to the Earth because the Earth could be wrecked. So we have to be able to be interplanetary or maybe even interstellar. I wish we would just take care of Earth a little bit better. I wouldn't mind that my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and others to come would be, I don't have great-grandchildren yet, but I have grandchildren, and I think of them and I want them to be able to live on Earth. And I want them to be able to live peacefully on Earth. And I don't want to blow up this planet, and I don't want to destroy the planet. And I'm not sure what these people think. They're heading for Mars, but, the rest of us are back here on Earth. And I would really like us to pay attention to that. And so far, we don't have much evidence that Trump is paying much attention to certain parts of that. For example, the environmental crisis, which is absolutely real, Trump won't pay any attention to for the next 4 years. His first act was to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which is completely dreadful, completely ignorant, completely harmful, but first act.
Jeffrey, es gibt noch einen Begriff, der immer wieder fällt, das ist Splendid Isolation. Das auch im Zuge von Donald Trump, dass man sich in Isolation begibt. Es gibt europäische Intellektuelle, die sagen, wenn die Amerikaner in Isolation gingen, in eine globale Isolation, dann wäre das eine Chance für die Welt, Frieden herzustellen. Würden Sie das auch so sehen wie die Intellektuellen?
There's a big misunderstanding about the United States and isolation. There is no isolationism in the United States. Donald Trump is not an isolationist. And interestingly, 100 years ago, at the end of World War I, when Woodrow Wilson proposed the League of Nations, and then the U.S. Senate rejected America's entry into the League of Nations, it was said, oh, America's isolationist. No. America rejected entry into the League of Nations in 1921 because America was imperialist, not isolationist. The lead opponent of America entering the League of Nations was a senator, Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a great fan of McKinley, a great fan of Theodore Roosevelt, and a great imperialist. And his big complaint was, we don't want to be in the League of Nations because then we're going to be stuck. We're going to have to do what they say. This is Trump. Trump doesn't have an ounce of isolation in him. What Trump is an imperialist. We don't know exactly which kind, we don't know how seriously, and so on. But Trump's whole idea, and he repeats it endlessly, is we are free and sovereign. What does that mean? It means we don't have to obey anybody. We don't have to sign any treaties. We don't have to live under the UN Charter. We're free. We're sovereign. Basically, it's a kind of global anarchy that he likes because he says the United States is so powerful, we'll do what we want. And that is not isolationism. So when he calls for, we're going to take Greenland because we want it, no joke. Canada's our 51st state, no joke. Do not think this is a joke. Then all the European politicians say, oh, yes, this is the transatlantic alliance, and we're all together in liberal values. Could some politicians here open their eyes and understand something about the current reality and get their act together to have a European policy? This would be very interesting from my point of view. Europe needs a foreign policy that isn't just, yes, Mr. President, or, oh, you want Greenland? Let's talk about it. We'll build bases. You can have resources, but don't take it away from us. Could somebody here have a real foreign policy?
Würden Sie sagen, dass Europa, ich würde das drastische Wort verwenden, ist Europa der Vasall der Amerikaner?
It became so after 2008. You can almost date it because you think about Willy Brandt. Was he a vassal of the United States? No way. Außenpolitik was not an American invention, believe me. This was not something the Americans liked or tolerated. Helmut Schmidt was not a vassal of the United States. Helmut Kohl was not a vassal of the United States. Helmut Kohl said, we're going to unify. And that was it. And he guided George Bush. We're going to do this. He guided Mikhail Gorbachev. I happened to have the chance to meet Chancellor Kohl during that process because I was an advisor to Poland. Germany was running a foreign policy then. There was no question about it. What happened? Well, you can almost date it to the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008. Because the United States wanted to do something really reckless, and that was commit to enlarging NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. And that was not only an utterly unnecessary, provocative thing to do, because it's right in Russia's face, but it was also completely contrary to every word that Hans-Dietrich Genscher and James Baker promised to Gorbachev for the German reunification. So Angela Merkel knew this, and she knew that it was dangerous. And while Schroeder had opposed the U.S.-Iraq war, for example, and was quite outspoken about it, in 2008, there's Angela Merkel, and she's in Bucharest, and George W. Bush Jr. is proposing some idiotic idea that there should be a membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia. And she says, no, this is a terrible idea. And she and Sarkozy say, no, we have to stop this. And Bush says, no, we are going to have Ukraine inside NATO. And in the end, she gives in. And she says, okay, and it's declared, Ukraine and Georgia will be part of NATO. That was the end of an independent German foreign policy as far as I'm concerned. Very sad, because she was completely right. She was resisting for the right reason, but she could not hold the opposition, or chose not to, gave in, and that put us on the path to war. In 2014, the U.S. participated in the violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government. Again, the Europeans had negotiated with Yanukovych on February 21st, 2014. You stay in power, get a unity government, and early elections several months down the road. The United States. New government. Pro-NATO. What did Europe do? Nothing. It just went with the United States. We had an assistant secretary of state at the time named Victoria Nuland. She had a phone call. Fuck the Europeans. Excuse my language. It was her language. What did Europe do? Absolutely whatever the United States said. Then in 2015 came the Minsk II agreement. And the Minsk II agreement was to be guaranteed by Germany and France in the Normandy process. And on February 17th, 2015, the UN Security Council voted unanimously to back the Minsk II agreement, with Germany as guarantor. What did Germany do? Nothing, because the United States said, ignore it. This is not something we're interested in. Did Germany stand up and say, no, but we have a UN Security Council vote, we're responsible? No, it didn't. Even Chancellor Merkel said a couple of years ago in a shocking interview, oh, it was just to buy time. I don't even believe she believed that in 2015, but she didn't stand up for the treaty. So from 2008 onward, I don't see an independent policy in Europe. I just see the Europeans following what the United States does. I can tell you the U.S. is incompetent, and it's put Europe in a terrible situation. And still today, if you ask President van der Leyen what her objective is, oh, good transatlantic relations. Till this moment, even with the United States saying we're going to take back Greenland, or take Greenland, for heaven's sake. By the way, the Vikings got there 1,000 years ago. The Danes have been there for a very long time, even before the Inuits, if I understand the history correctly. Maybe I don't. But in any event, here you have the United States saying we're going to put on tariffs, we're going to take Greenland. And Europe is full of how we love America and how this is a transatlantic relationship. And if the U.S. stops the war in Ukraine, we'll continue the war, and all this nonsense, rather than a sound foreign policy for Europe, which is based on security and prosperity for Europe.
Was mich ein bisschen verwundert, die Republikaner in Amerika galten viele Jahre lang eigentlich als Falken, als diejenigen, die Krieg wollen. Jetzt sind die Republikaner diejenigen, die Frieden in Aussicht stellen, und die Demokraten haben in den letzten 4 Jahren Krieg forciert. Wo kommt diese Umkehrung her, dass die Demokraten plötzlich Falken sind?
Well, I scratch my head over this too, because I was a lifelong Democrat until I left the party out of disgust, because it became the war party. I wouldn't say the Republicans are exactly the peace party, but maybe Trump will end some of these wars, maybe. We have to be very vigilant because there's no guarantee of that. But the Democrats, my God, absolutely lost the voice for peace. And it happened step by step. There was a very militant part of the Democratic Party. Hillary Clinton was of that ilk, for example. She's a neocon hardliner. She's now my colleague at Columbia University also. But she was always for these wars and pretty terrible foreign policy as far as I'm concerned. But even then, there were Democrats that were opposed to that. And so I was in the wing that was the anti-war wing. And in the Iraq War in 2003, there were Democrats on the other side that said we shouldn't do this. But Obama followed Bush Jr. It became a continuity. Bush Jr. and Obama, very little change in foreign policy. The only change was that as Obama came into office, he got the Nobel Peace Prize for nothing. And then he tried to overthrow the Syrian government and overthrew the government of Libya and overthrew the government, or was part of the conspiracy to overthrow, or the coup to overthrow the government of Ukraine. From then on, I had fewer and fewer people that I could talk to in the Democratic Party, because I know a lot of congressmen and senators, and they were not interested in hearing my complaints about peace. By the time of the Biden administration, there was no one, as one congressman that I kind of talked to about this, but basically no one in the Democratic Party was ready to express any opposition to the Biden foreign policy. The Biden foreign policy was a continuity of neoconservatism. It was expand NATO, antagonize China, divide the world between democracies and autocracies. And if you come into office dividing the world, we're good, you're evil, you're basically gearing up for conflict. And that's what the Biden administration did. So maybe one thing that happened was that since Biden went that way and the Democrats were trying to keep power, they just followed Biden as the leader and no one would speak out on the other side. So maybe it was just tactical. But I can tell you for the last 4 years, I couldn't find a congressman who would really speak out and say we shouldn't be in this Iraq war, or in the Ukraine war. To his credit, Bernie Sanders, who I advised in his 2016 election, did speak out against the U.S. backing of Israel, so that was a plus. But generally, the Democrats lost it.
Donald Trump, Sie sprachen es ja an, spricht einerseits vom Frieden und Sie wissen nicht genau, wie das weitergeht mit ihm. Gleichzeitig ist es so, er spricht von Kanada, er spricht von Grönland und kreist Russland im Grunde von Norden ein. Durchschauen Sie Trump, Jeffrey?
Truly, we're in the early days of new surprises and adventures. So I don't think anyone has clarity on these issues. But if I try to understand what Trump is doing and saying, it's basically a kind of great power politics where the U.S. says there are three big powers, Russia, China, and the U.S. will basically divide the turf. And probably, if I interpret Trump and he follows through, will divide the turf and will stay out of each other's way. So I think he wants to end the war in Ukraine, and I think he will, by the way. I don't see the U.S. continuing to arm or finance Ukraine to fight a losing war. And I think basically Trump says Russia's big power. Why are we at war with Russia and Ukraine? He has said he understands that Putin doesn't like NATO on his border, and he says, I understand that. And by the way, if Russia ever tried this stunt in the Western Hemisphere, in Cuba or in Mexico or any place in the Western Hemisphere, we'd immediately be at war over it. So one interpretation which is possible is Trump's means what he says. I like Putin, Russia's great power. I like President Xi, China's great power. We'll stay in our lane, you stay in your lane, China stays in its lane. But our lane includes Greenland and Panama and Canada. Yeah, we're the Western Hemisphere, we're the hegemon of the Western Hemisphere. No one, neither Russia nor China, is going to tell us what to do. We don't like the submarines snooping around Greenland. We don't want them anywhere close to us. That's the 21st century version of the Monroe Doctrine. And so one plausible, possible interpretation of Trump is to say, the Western Hemisphere is ours, and we're not going to bother you in Ukraine, we're not going to bother you in Taiwan. Now, if that's the interpretation, one thing is important and positive. That would reduce the chance of nuclear war. It really would, because this stupidity of the U.S. to need to put NATO into Ukraine, or to be arming Taiwan by billions of dollars, or to be talking about an East Asian NATO. This is crazy. This brings us really closer to nuclear war. So Trump is better at that. Of course, if he's serious, we're going to grab Greenland, we're going to take Canada, we're going to take Panama. Oh my God, we're in for a lot of instability. There's adventures ahead. Trump says a lot of bullshit. One shouldn't take it all that seriously right now, except if I were Europe, I would still get my act together and stop all of the Western values rhetoric and talk about a European security arrangement. But I think that it's just possible that Trump pulls the great powers back from the brink of confrontation, because Biden was bringing us closer to war with China and active war with Russia. Biden was not doing his job of making America more secure. He was making America less secure.
Lassen Sie uns mal nach Russland kommen. Sie waren selbst in Russland in den 90er Jahren als Berater. Ich habe vor einigen Jahren gelesen im Spiegel, dass Sie bereuen würden, dass die russische Rohstoffindustrie privatisiert wurde. Da sind ja viele neoliberale Reformen geschehen, ein bisschen so wie die Schocktherapie bei Naomi Klein. Würden Sie sagen, dass Putin eine Kreatur der Schockstrategie ist?
I didn't regret privatization. I didn't have anything to do with the privatization of the natural resources. I opposed it. I want everyone to understand very clearly. My role was one thing: to try to help mobilize Western financial support to help stabilize Russia. And the United States and Germany and others said, no, we're not helping. Okay? So what I tried to do, which was to make a soft landing for a country in crisis, was rejected. That was my role, trying to help prevent a crisis. But the people in Washington who were stupid, ignorant of economics, arrogant, and viewing Russia as a foe rather than as a country that wanted just peaceful, normal relations, rejected the most basic things that you do to help a country have financial stabilization. I had nothing to do with natural resources or privatization. I opposed all the corruption. I resigned early because I was trying to raise funds to help Russia stabilize, and it was not accepted. Now, I've written about this at length. People are welcome to look at what I've written just to understand that. But because I was a widely known name, lots of things were attributed to me that were the opposite of what I said. Well, that was my learning about how the media works. And the media works in very strange ways, but it often is not exactly very accurate. So the point is that Russian stabilization could have been a lot smoother, faster, better for Russia, better for the world. Incidentally, where I learned about this was from Germany's post-World War I experience, because my guiding understanding came from John Maynard Keynes, who in 1919 wrote a book criticizing the Versailles Treaty, a very famous book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace. And he said the Versailles Treaty is too harsh on Germany. It will lead to crisis and backlash. And God, what he said came to pass tragically. And so I learned from that from the earliest days of my career. And what I said in 1990, 91, 92, 93, before I resigned from this attempt, was don't replay the mistake of 1919. Help Russia to stabilize. That's what I said. And I was right. And the Americans were foolish, nasty, hubristic. And what I didn't know then was that that would continue for the next generation. Stupid is the word I use, because they don't know how to make peace. And I'm hoping that they'll finally learn something about this. But until now, through all of these administrations, I dealt with every one of them. I dealt with the last year of the Bush senior administration. I dealt with the Clinton administration. I dealt with the Bush junior administration, with the Obama administration, with Trump, with Biden. They don't know how to make peace, these people. They're arrogant. They think the U.S. runs the show. They don't know how to help other countries that are in need. And then they are surprised when things don't work out their way. They're reckless, they're gamblers, they're ignorant. And this, I think, is a big problem.
Wir haben jetzt von Ökonomie gesprochen, neoliberaler Ökonomie. Sie haben auch von der Inkompetenz der Politiker gesprochen, was ökonomische Fragen betrifft. Wir haben in Deutschland durchaus auch damit zu tun. Wir haben immer noch die Folgen der Reaganomics auch hier zu spüren. Wir machen hier neoliberale Politik. Es gibt hier so einen Begriff, der heißt Schuldenbremse. Das ist nicht nur ein Begriff, sondern das ist, das, was es besagt. Die Schuldenbremse eben, man kann nicht so viel Schulden aufnehmen. Wie sehen Sie das als Ökonom? Ist das was Vernünftiges?
The basic idea of debt is that you borrow if the investment that the debt is going to finance has a high rate of return for society. So it's often right to borrow if it's investing in infrastructure or in research and development or in other ways that raise the capacity of the economy, the productivity of the economy, the growth of the economy. The idea that you don't borrow is only right if you're borrowing for consumption in a way that's unsustainable, so that you're really eating up the future. But if you're borrowing for investment, it's the opposite. The problem with our budgets, we don't have a capital budget and a current budget. So we don't distinguish clearly what is the spending for. We make a very simple line and we make a very simple number. And then if you want to borrow for something quite important, that is an investment in the future that's going to raise the income and the productivity and the tax revenues in the future, the rule tells you, no, you can't do that because we don't have even the right basic model. And I'm engaged with this many times in poorer countries where the poor country doesn't have electricity, it doesn't have digital access, it can't even afford to get or keep the kids in school. And I know as a development economist, the rate of return to those activities is extremely high. So I say, yes, you don't have the current revenue to do that, but you should borrow because it will lead to economic growth, it will lead to higher incomes, and you'll be able to repay the debt out of something more in the future. The IMF tells them, no, don't borrow, just learn to live without electricity. So no, I don't like these arbitrary rules. I think we're much more sophisticated. We should, of course, have a vision of the economy, but not just a nice poetic vision, but a numerical, quantified vision of what borrowing would be, what investment would be, what kind of growth, what the future capacity, what the fiscal policies would be, and then we could think about these things. By the way, one country that finances investment on a large scale is China. Now, they save a lot, but they also invest a lot. And look what they're getting. They're getting very rapid growth, and they're 50,000 kilometers of fast rail. The United States has 0 right now. We finance wars with our deficits. They finance high-speed rail. So I would rather that all of us have investment budgets that make sense for the future.
Ich will mal polemisch fragen nach Wladimir Putin und den Amerikanern. Die amerikanischen Eliten verachten ihn genauso wie unsere. Könnte das daran liegen, dass Wladimir Putin der Bekämpfer der Oligarchie in Russland war und der im Grunde, naja, das bekämpft, was die Eliten in Amerika sind, Oligarchen?
No, I don't think that this is the root of it. The root of it is very basic, and it goes back 180 years, in fact. Russia is a big country. And so the British Empire hated Russia because Russia, to them, was a competitor. The United States hates Russia because Russia is a competitor. It's as simple as that. It's very fascinating to understand the first Crimean War, which was 1853 to 1856. It's almost the same as the current Ukraine war. It was, in the case of the first Crimean War, Britain and France trying to push Russia out of the Black Sea. And in fact, they did so for many years. They besieged Sevastopol, and Russia fell, and they forced Russia to dismantle its Black Sea fleet. Now, why did they do that? Russia was not a threat to France or to Britain, but the British Empire said, oh, Russia's big, maybe they're going to invade India through Central Asia, and they concocted a fairy tale that Russia had no intention of doing, and came to the conclusion that Russia was a sworn enemy, which was ironic because Russia and Britain had been allies against Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. So a very good history was written by a historian named Gleason, published in 1970, on the origins of Russophobia. How did Britain come to hate Russia? And he read everything, studied every speech, every debate in the British Parliament for decades. And the conclusion after several hundred pages is there was no reason for the Russophobia other than the British Empire resenting Russia. That's all. Now, I've been through this for more than 35 years. I sat face to face with Boris Yeltsin when he said, we want to be normal country, peaceful, cooperative, democracy, market economy. And I said to him, President Yeltsin, I'm going to get you support from the United States. And I failed to do so because Washington gave me the finger, basically. Now, why? Not because of anything Russia did, not because of any action, not because of Putin, not because of anything except the American so-called strategists wanted to dismantle Russia the same way that they thought they had dismantled the Soviet Union. In fact, as soon as the Soviet Union fell, okay, the next step is decolonize or dismantle Russia. This is how they think. And the Americans, it's very strange. Not strange, maybe it's perfectly understandable, but for me it's very strange. If the Americans have an adversary and the adversary says, we'd like peace with you, That means to the Americans, we better bomb them because they're weak right now, because they're asking for peace. That means we can defeat them. This is what's happening with Iran right now. The Iranians for the last 2 years have been sending signals to first the Biden administration, now to the Trump administration. I know it, by the way, because I speak to a lot of people. And the signal is, we want peace, we want to negotiate. Oh, from the American and the Israeli point of view, now we should go get them. They're weak. That's the mentality of a bully. That's what this is about. It's not anything specific that Putin has done. It's just, this is bullying from a country, the United States, that says we run the world. And they don't even make anything about that. They write books about the U.S. running the world. This is not a secret exactly. They call it liberal hegemony. I don't know what the liberal part is, but the hegemony is very clear. This is the ideology, this is the attempt, this is the arrogance, and unfortunately it's getting us into a lot of trouble. Maybe Trump will do something different.
Jeffrey, die Zeit drängt, das weiß ich, aber eine kurze Frage zum Abschluss. Sie sind einer der wenigen Intellektuellen aus Amerika, die sich um einen sachlichen Umgang mit Russland bemühen. Mir fallen da eine Handvoll anderer ein. Woran liegt das? Also in Deutschland ist es ja genauso, aber woran liegt das, dass man von den Intellektuellen so wenig Widerworte zur herrschenden Politik vernimmt?
I think it's probably my good fortune to have a career where I have spent time all over the world, worked with governments all over the world, worked with the societies all over the world, found people likable everywhere, by the way, very basic point, but every place I've worked, the Middle East, the Arab region, all through Africa, China, Central Asia, Latin America, every place that I've worked, people have been incredibly hospitable. Culture is wonderful. A lot of beauty, charm, diversity. So first of all, sounds stupid and naive maybe, but I like the whole world, you know. I don't feel it's us against anybody. I really like being in China. I have lots of friends, lots of students. I admire lots about the government. I've had many wonderful colleagues in Russia and in many other places. So for more than 40 years, I've seen the United States from outside looking in, plus knowing all the people inside. Some have been my students, some have been my colleagues, some have been my teachers, but I've known them. It's not that I'm looking at something far away. I'm watching pretty close up. I've had conversations with presidents that made my head spin because it was not what you want from an American president. And so I think it's probably how I've learned over time and my experience, and I kind of would like the world to live together peacefully. And I, as an economist, believe that there's enough to go around for everybody to live a decent life. So all of this great struggle, I don't believe in at all. The worst of humanity in this country, the worst of humanity in general, has come from the us versus them thinking and this panic that there's only so much to go around, so we better invade, we better grab Lebensraum, we better do whatever. This is all wrong economically. It's morally atrocious, but it's all wrong economically as well. So I know that this crazy anti-China business or this anti-Russia business makes no sense from an economic point of view, but also it makes no sense when I watch the actual events. So that's, I suppose, why I have come to this kind of viewpoint.
Jeffrey, thank you very much. It was really a great honor for me.
Great pleasure for me and a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.